Hey everybody. To all those people who have been commenting saying that they like my voice and enjoy the videos and the stories, thank you for taking the time to respond. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to reach out to me. I appreciate everything that you're saying, taking everything into account, and I'm glad you like my voice, and I'm glad you like the stories. And some people are even giving me nicknames, which I didn't expect. One person called me Mr. Facts. Another person said Senior Facts, SR period Facts. I appreciate that. I'm glad. I'm not Latino, and I only have decent enough Spanish when I follow Duolingo on a regular basis. One person called me Facts Dad, which I get. I'm old, but I don't hate it. One of my favorite musicians here on YouTube is Mark Rebier, who goes under the name Loop Daddy by his fans. And I realize Dad and Daddy are two different things. But do you think Facts Dad fits, or is another nickname more appropriate? Let me know in the comments. And let's get to some people who are adults but don't have adult behavior. What's the biggest adult tantrum you've seen? Story 1. My late grandmother was a pro at temper tantrums. We were outside Loblaws one day. She wanted to go home. All cab companies were slammed as it was baby bonus day, so it'd be a half-hour wait. I called the cab company my second stepdad worked for, asked for a car at Loblaws, and told them the address. My grandmother, much like a petulant child, refused to get out of her wheelchair and into the waiting cab because it wasn't United. The driver was horrified at this tantrum and said, "Would you like me to ask dispatch to call United for you?" So I embarrassingly said, "Yeah, anything to shut her up." He went back to the driver's side to call dispatch saying elderly customer when it hit me. Vern's working. He won't put up with this stuff. So I opened the passenger's side door and said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, I just had an idea. My second stepdad's working and he doesn't put up with this. Ask for Vern to be sent here." So he says, "Customer's granddaughter is requesting Vern to be sent to Loblaws for this situation." Before dispatch could say he was picking up a klepto at Food Basics, he peeled into the parking lot, slammed on his brakes, jumped out of his van, slammed the driver's door shut, stormed up to my grandmother in her chair and says, "I have had it over my freaking Godzilla head with your antics. Now get your Godzilla butt into that passenger seat while I put your chair and groceries in the back. You've given your granddaughter enough trouble as it is. I don't give a care what you want. You've caused your granddaughter enough grief to last her a lifetime. I don't cursing blame her if her mother shows up here and takes her on a mother-daughter date for the remainder of the day while you sit at home with a home nurse's company. Now move your butt into that cursing passenger seat." That was it. She got up out of her wheelchair, opened the passenger seat door, got in, sat down, buckled up, and I said, "You know where we live. After everything is put away and her nurse companion arrives, I'm going to take the dogs on a bus ride to Point Edward." He took us home, got her into the house. I unpacked and put away the groceries, called her nurse companion saying, "I need a break from being the main caregiver. Can you come keep my grandmother company until I come home?" Then got the dogs ready to go out. Vern gave me a free ride under the bridge where he dropped us, assisting us in getting the stroller out and ensuring I had money to get myself and the dogs something to eat, and telling dispatch to tell the klepto to curse off and go get arrested. It was well past midnight when I got home as I walked from Point Edward to Northgate, and from Northgate uptown to Centennial Park where we stayed until well past 11. When I called and asked Vern to come pick me up and the dogs to take us home. Her nurse was frustrated and angry at her because she threw a hot cup of tea at her, followed by her food because it wasn't made right. I don't know what was the cause of her behavior. Was she really being stubborn, or was she suffering from some sort of mental deterioration? There has to be some sort of line where you have some kind of sympathy. It kind of sounds like she's just being stubborn. And I'm glad everybody was able to kind of handle the situation with her without it getting too bad. I kind of like this epic rant Vern was going on here. I wish I could have had the whole thing uncensored, but, you know, the algorithm doesn't like cursing, so we gotta move on. Story 2. My brother has had several tantrums over the years, and at the age of 29, still has them. There's several that stuck with me, but this one I think takes the cake. I was about 10 or 11 at the time, so he would have been 13 or 14. Our dad had given us bottle rockets for the 4th of July. When giving them to us, he told us to not give any to the younger children because they were dangerous. I found a plastic tube and was firing them off into the air with it, while my brother started tying multiple together by the fuses before lighting them. Of course, he quickly ran out. He came over to me and said, "The kids are running low on Snappets. You should share your bottle rockets with them." I told him no. Dad said not to. He started calling me selfish, and I just outright told him I knew what he was doing. He wasn't worried about the kids. He just wanted my bottle rockets and that I hadn't seen him sharing any of his. I started to light another one and held up the plastic tube. As I did, my brother grabbed me so I couldn't move and held my thumb down on the small stick of the bottle rocket. I tried to pull away, but then the sparks came out and started burning my thumb. Afraid I was about to get my thumb blown off, I started stomping on his foot as hard as I could. After like 2 or 3 stomps, he grabbed by the side of my head and shoved me to the ground. He started kicking me repeatedly in the stomach over and over again. I heard my mom and aunt start screaming, and then suddenly our oldest brother was shoving him off of me, and that, "If you want to kick someone, try doing it with a man instead of a little girl." He didn't say anything. He just stood there glaring while breathing so heavily I could see his shoulders rising up and down. For a moment, I was scared he was actually going to take him up on the offer before he gave me that look that just said, "I hate you," and walked away. He hasn't had a tantrum where he's gotten physical in 5 years. But there's no doubt in my mind that it's not because he's grown past putting his hands on people. He just hasn't been that angry enough to do it. I've always thought, I looked it up, there's a difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. The sociopath doesn't care about anybody's feelings or what happens to them. A psychopath is willing to get violent. I know that's very basic, and there's a lot of gray areas in between, but this tantrum was just on this side of psychopathy. It was psychopathic. It's good that it hasn't happened for 5 years. Has there been any therapy that's been happening since then? Or is it true that he just hasn't been that angry enough? Has anybody ever thought to put him in therapy? Has there been any other instances before this? Anyway, story 3. About 20 years ago, my father once dropped a plastic bottle of Heinz ketchup on the floor, right in front of the fridge. Despite being plastic, it burst open and spilled all over the floor. My father was absolutely apoplectic, totally out of control. My mother tried to get around him to get paper towels, but he was yelling at her to not move, otherwise she would track the ketchup on the floor. I had the bright idea to walk through our living room and dining room to get to where the paper towels were in the kitchen, and since there were 2 entrances to our kitchen, the one by the fridge, the other through the dining room. As I walked into the dining room, I saw my mother hit my father on the shoulder because she thought that what she saw on TV, slapping someone when they were hysterical to snap them out of it, would snap my father out of his blind rage. Instead, he immediately whirled around and hit her back. They then started screaming at each other that the other person was out of control. It was the worst argument I ever remember seeing them have, especially over something so small and petty. But because I had an appointment with my therapist at the time, we were actually just leaving when it happened. My mother did not stay to help my father clean up the mess. It was an easy, fixable problem. but because my father grew up in a family where tempers usually ran hot and people always yelled at each other, the smallest thing could set him off, and he would be blind to the obvious solution to the problem. But my mother learned an important lesson that day, that what you see on TV, such as slapping someone to break them out of their hysteria, is not always applicable to real life and can result in bad consequences for you. Some might interpret that as a textbook case of domestic violence. Others might interpret it as things just boiling over, a one-off incident. But despite that rather ugly episode, they're still married to this day, and I've never seen them hit each other since. I'm glad that worked out. When things get physical, you got to get out of there. Maybe for a little bit, maybe for a break, maybe for good. Just get away. There's no reason to hit someone else because of an argument. Self-defense is one thing. This wasn't self-defense. If there's something where you're getting hit, get away. Just get away, if just to cool off. No reason to hit someone else. Story 4. Also a chemistry teacher. She was not very happy with her job. She wanted to teach history and French, but seeing as she studied under the communist regime, they wouldn't let her take that combination of subjects as they believed it wasn't necessary. They told her she could take French, but only if she took chemistry as her secondary specialization. About a year before I enrolled in the school she ended up at, the school canceled their French teaching plans. So this woman was stuck teaching only chemistry all the time. She was a bad teacher, unenthusiastic, really disinterested in her own subject, and her time management and scheduling were off as well. So it happened that she announced a test that would count towards your mark next year, because the marks for that year were already closed. This, by the way, is illegal in my country. Most of the class just took it up with the secretary and silently agreed that if the chemistry teacher tried to put the marks up next year, the secretary would delete them, and nobody would really speak of it. Well, one kid wasn't really aware of the whole arrangement. Somehow, after the said test was done and written, he began acting up, and when the teacher called him out, he told her that acting up was not illegal, but what she was doing was. The teacher lost it. She started screaming that we were ungrateful and that she was doing this for us because we might not remember what we learned after the summer break. After a good 10 minutes of yelling at the whole class, she ripped up the tests, threw them out, and then sat at her desk silently crying for the rest of the lesson. The following school year turned out to be her last at that school, and she spent most of it drinking vodka out of a thermos thinking nobody would notice. Or maybe she just didn't care. She got a new job as a private French teacher. Last I met her, she looked better than ever, all smiles, and obviously doing well for herself. It's sad that it had to go that far before getting better. Story 5. This reminds of a former friend of mine whom I've talked about on this channel. Let's call her Molly. Perpetually broke, she couldn't even afford to pay attention, but always had her hair done, her nails done, a full pack of cigarettes and booze in the fridge. Bills? Her children's welfare? They be damned. She was the most important thing in the world, and how dare anyone not realize that? She was so narcissistic, it was disgusting. I remember one particular instance where, despite not having any money, she wanted to use my car to go buy cigarettes. I said point blank she wasn't going anywhere unless she gave me gas money. She proceeded to have a 5-alarm meltdown with full-on feet stomping, unintelligible ranting, and flailing her arms like a spoiled toddler who just got told no. She kept glancing back at me to just see this incredulous expression on my face, as I couldn't believe a woman in her late 40s, who was also about to become a grandmother, behaving that way. She rather snootily asked me what I was looking at. My response? Nothing. Just seeing where your son got his awful behavior from. Her face turned 50 shades of red, and she raged, spewed at me in order to leave her house right then and there. It was actually in foreclosure, but to her, facts were just pesky, annoying little irrelevancies. I gladly obliged and got up, then headed to the door, responding that if I did leave, she wouldn't be able to go to the local corner store to get her precious cigarettes. Her face went ghost white, her eyes bugged out of her head, and her jaw went slack. Naturally, Molly, being Molly, couldn't let it go. She had to get the last word. On the drive home, I was subjected to a bunch of abusive, grammatically incorrect, poorly spelled text messages accusing me of everything under the sun, to being mean to her, being a horrible friend, etc., etc. I swear I felt like I was dealing with a toddler. I'm so glad we're not friends anymore.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 6. That reminds me of my chess teacher in elementary school. Everyone had to choose some extra lessons at regular schedule. Because chess was one of them, it became a default choice for anyone who wasn't interested in anything else. As a side effect, this led to some less astute students going there. About 80% of the attendants didn't give a care about chess and were just there to not have to sit through regular lessons. Our teacher, a guy in his 60s, was well aware of that, so he just kept to those who were interested in chess and let the rest do whatever. Then, when it was near the end of the school year, he decided that it's been enough of that and said that either they can play chess in his class or they can leave. Begrudgingly, they obliged. Of course, when the teacher wasn't looking, they were playing anything but chess. However, the moment I'll never forget is when they were playing an actual game of chess and the checkmate happened. The one who lost tried to flip the table, but it was right next to a wall under the windowsill, so it didn't work. Failing that, he instead took the whole board with the pieces and threw all of it right out of the open second-floor window. To say that teacher wasn't happy would be an understatement. He lunged at the guy and started yelling at him among the similar lines of the chemistry teacher in the previous story. The guys I was playing chess with all sat and listened while teachers started tearing into other students who were making fun of the whole chess thing. He was yelling and articulating so hard that he dropped his glasses. I quickly picked them up and gave them back to him, after which he tried to put them back, but he noticed they're damaged, so he slammed them right on the floor with full force, called everyone a band of stupid morons, and left the class. The look of disbelief on everyone's face and dead silence that followed was priceless. Do you think the teacher really liked chess, or did he just not like that his class was disrespected? I don't think it was the best way to react to the situation. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I read a story about a guy who was a janitor at a school, but afterwards he would teach chess. He was actually much more qualified to be a teacher than a janitor, but this was all the work he could get. It sounds like he was more even-headed than this person. Do you think that chess brings out heavy emotions in people? I know there's speed chess being played online and on streams. But do you think there's a typical response to think of a chess player as someone that's cool-headed and always thinking a few steps ahead? Or are there hot-headed chess players? What do you think? Story 7. I used to work as parking ticket agent for a private company. One of the places we were hired to control was the parking lot of a restaurant near the highway. One time, I gave a guy a ticket because he had failed to correctly indicate when he had parked. Parking was free in that place. You just couldn't stay there any longer than 2 hours. And the rules said I had to give every offender a 5-minute grace period before I could print anything. So the guy comes out of the restaurant, sees the ticket, and then sees me checking other cars. Naturally, he objects to it, telling me that I'm a moron, this was unfair, he was gone for 10 minutes, etc. I told him calmly and professionally that there was nothing I could do. The system worked in the way that I could literally not do anything about a ticket once it had been printed. After that, if you had a grievance, you needed to take it up the chain of the company, and maybe you could get it overturned. The guy listens to this, throws his hands up in the air, and storms back into the restaurant. I didn't see what happened in there, but I just continued to carry out my duties, and not 5 minutes later, the guy comes back out, big smug grin on his face, and says he got it overturned, which they can do as they set the terms for parking and just hired us to control it. And now I won't be getting paid, and drove off. I just shook my head and continued on with my day. What the man-child in question didn't know was that I couldn't have cared less. I wasn't paid by bounty, but an hourly wage. so I always saw the same salary regardless of how many tickets I printed in the month. Story 8. Not a tantrum, but a well-deserved earful. Yesterday, my sister, an instructor at a dance studio, was at a studio's competition review. All the girls, their parents, and teachers were there all day long, along with at least one actual competition judge to give them feedback before they start going to competitions. Well, a couple of girls who didn't know their dance were talking with each other throughout, and even started laughing at the end, which they had yet to be taught because of their lack of work ethic. The professional judge laid into them in front of everyone from the studio, saying that they should be ashamed with themselves as they are being disrespectful, and you're wasting the time of all your fellow dancers, their parents, your teachers, and mine, and my time is worth so much more than the garbage you just showed me. The studio has been having classes since August, each class being once a week, and those two have been to a total of 5 classes. My sister's classes were mostly complimented on their performances. One was told they weren't as advanced in the dance as they should be. They were all doing the same moves, and there should be parts where they are doing different things, which my sister plans on doing, if the girls would actually pay attention in class. My sister has the musical theater dance classes, and the judge stated that she knew my sister was in the theater/musicals by the choreography. She has a minor in musical theater, and said my sister knew what she was doing because the dances told the story, including backstories not in the song, which many instructors ignore or try to fake. Story 9. It happened during the pandemic. I was working in a hair salon by that time, in a reserved room, and the 75-year-old lady, who had caused problems in the past already, with mental and hearing problems, had a full beauty day to dye, hydrate, and stylize her hair. The final part was set to start at 3:30 p.m., and her hairstylist, we had different professionals for each service, came in 10 minutes earlier than expected. However, in her mind, the stylist should have come 30 minutes earlier because she has calculated the right time she'd have to wait from service to service. She screams at the stylist, complaining about the lateness and slamming the table with all her strength. Everyone in the room and the salon heard her clearly, and it was a pretty big salon. By the time the stylist ended with her job, the lady proceeds to walk to the receptionist and yell at them for putting the services in the wrong time. Turns out that the lady had called the day earlier, and when she realizes what she said, she pretended nothing happened and left the salon. Of course she shouldn't have had that attitude. Do you think part of the attitude comes from the fact that a person of her age, in her day, service was a very big thing? It's deteriorated the way service industry people have been treated over the years. I think back in this person's time, service was expected, and it was something that you took pride in. I think that might be part of the problem. I mean, in any case, she should not have reacted the way she did, though. I mean, just because the service is bad, there's no reason to yell like that. Plus, she got called out, but she tried to pretend that nothing happened. So I think she just knows in the back of her mind she was wrong. Hopefully there's a little sliver of humanity still left in her. Story 10. When working in retail, I saw my fair share of stroppy adults. One shorter story is when a family came in buying roughly many items of clothing for a wedding. It was taking a while to scan all the items because of how much stuff there was, and they wanted to try things in other colors and such. Well, I've been helping this family for roughly 20 minutes, and the dad starts acting worse than the 2 kids. He was getting impatient, starting to loudly tap his foot and sigh whilst the mum sorted everything out. He started complaining, asking how long this was going to take and so on. Eventually, he got so impatient that he told the mum he was leaving and for her to give him the car keys. They argued for a bit until she eventually did, and he just left his wife there with the 2 kids. Well, he left with the second card, and when the wife tried to pay, the first card failed. So they had to call him and wait for him to come back so they could pay. They returned 2 hours later, and he was in no better mood. Story 11. My dad and I once visited a Taco Bell for a quick lunch. While we were waiting for our order, a grown girl came up to the counter and said, "I need to talk to the manager now." When the manager came out, she started yelling at him because, get this, There was a hair in her burrito. She was accusing the staff of not wearing hairnets and demanding a refund from them, all because of a single hair that somehow ended up in her food. This little incident ended up shaking up the staff so much that they forgot that my tacos weren't supposed to have lettuce in them. My dad and I informed them of this mistake, and while we had them redo the order, we told them that we understood that they were rattled from that one lady being so harsh with them. In the end, I got my tacos, and some employees at a pool supply store got a free lunch. Story 12. When I worked in a coffee shop, an ex-employee had told a woman she could have a free cake from the shop whenever she wanted because he obviously wanted to get her into bed. She came up to me saying, "I'm Daniel's friend. He said I could have a free cake." I told her Daniel was full of poop, not to mention he didn't even work there anymore, and if she wanted a cake, she needed to pay up. She paid, but snatched the cake off of me and stamped her feet all the way out of the shop. This woman was in her 30s, at least. Thanks, Daniel, you idiot. Story 13. This took place within the confines of my former roommate's room, so I only have a partial idea of the situation that sparked this. But based on what I gathered from my roommate screeching at her boyfriend, she told a joke that offended him. He told her he was offended, and she had a meltdown. It was about 9 a.m., mind you. Both I and our other roommate were out of bed at the time, if not entirely awake. I still remember my other roommate coming into the living room, still in her pajamas, rolling her eyes at shrieking roommate's closed door, and sarcastically muttering, "Well, good morning." Story 14. My mother was arrested inside of an Ashley's furniture store when she was having a psychotic episode due to withdrawal from amphetamines, and lost it on the salesperson because they could not get her the deal that she was promised. She put up quite a fight, and they had to call a SWAT team. It took 6 of those people to drive her out of there. I was so embarrassed. Stay away from Adderall, that's all I can tell you.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.